Beautiful Monday.
Beautiful Monday. Welcome. It is March 27th, the Ides of March. Beware the I can't think of any like good Ides of March analog joke to make about crypto space and all of the horse puckery.
Well,
But today's Monday, March 27th. It's
look,
8:30 a.m. This is the Crypto Flight Path, looking to unpack and understand what new and exciting and repackaged and rehashed FUD we can look forward to this week.
oh, it should be interesting. It's a constant stream of fun, man. But it looks like the market held up pretty well over the weekend. Uh, you're looking at Bitcoin sitting at 27,940, right under 28,000. Ethereum's at 1770. So, pretty boring weekend. Nothing really happened price wise.
Oh yes, and that is well. There's two ways to look at that, in my opinion, depending on your bias and depending on whether or not you're interested in this space, or if you love it or hate it. I think it's interesting to understand that in the face of, or in spite of, and maybe as a result of all of the extend or all of the extraordinary FUD measures, and despite everything that's happened, Bitcoin price has held, or the market for Bitcoin, the participants have supported the price by acquiring it, despite all the attempts for people to try and sell it down back down to 20,000 or 10,000 or zero, despite what you hear. So that's another interesting thing that I mean, I think everybody should pay attention if you care and you're paying attention. One thing to pay attention to is how this particular asset, and among others in this asset class, perform despite all of the nastiness that is aimed at it, and it keeps fighting back. And I think that's a really important characteristic that we
Well,
should all
it's
be like
it's
tuned in
it's
on.
proven itself to be very resilient in the face of constant attacks from the media, from the legacy financial system. It's held its own. So, speaking of market participants, Michael Saylor and Microstrategy, they just announced that they repaid their $205 million Silvergate loan at 22% discount. As of 3/23, Microstrategy acquired an additional 6,455 Bitcoin for $100, an average of 23,238 per Bitcoin. So here's somebody who is one of Bitcoin's most vocal proponents, putting his money where his mouth is and buying more Bitcoin, and not just buying more Bitcoin, buying absolute ton of more. So it looks like they've acquired that at an average price of 23,000. So that brings their total holdings to $29,800. So they are up a little bit on their total average cost of Bitcoin, which is pretty remarkable considering everything that's transpired over the past year. You know, Michael Saylor is continuing to put his money where his mouth is.
Yes, interesting that when Bitcoin was plumbing the depths of sub to the sub 20,000 per Bitcoin depths, that people were once again calling for its demise in the further death spiral. Yet here we have a market participant who happens to have some celebrity firepower in their arsenal, in a manner of speaking, or also has a substantial amount of capital firepower. But the most important takeaway that I have, or the thing that I take away from this, is that they weren't trying to buy the absolute bottom, or they weren't, or let me put it this way. I'll speak about Michael Saylor and the other people that make up the organization. It's not just him at the controls. It's easy for us to think of it that way, but I know that things are never as complex, or in many respects things are never as complex as they seem, but they're also not as simple as they seem. And it's really easy for us to just think, oh well, Michael Saylor's just punching the buttons over there. I'm trying to communicate the following: is that the amount of, and I'll make a Bitcoin pun, the amount of consensus required internally in the organization for them to continue to take the capital risk, the reputation risk, as some might call it, for participating in this market, and the vote of confidence around that comes from MicroStrategy shareholders that continue to put their money where their mouth is by buying MicroStrategy shares or buying stock in the company, with the understanding that the actions that we're seeing the company take in general by acquiring more Bitcoin at basically any price, meaning they weren't trying to buy the bottom, and they understand the long-term trajectory, or they have a long-term bias in terms of where they think the price is going, considering things that have been expressed in the past around this is an asymmetrical uh, bet in a manner of speaking. But there are a lot of people with a lot to lose that are putting their money on the line, both MicroStrategy shareholders, the board of directors, and the company's or the company's PR function about communicating that the way that they're participating in the market. And the thing that matters the most is that they're putting substantial amounts of fiat dollars to work in this asset called Bitcoin, and they're doing it in public in front of everyone. Just imagine if I mean, a lot of us do this when we, as individuals, we tweet and it goes into the ether and sinks, into oblivion. But when a market participant with the the presence and the following, imagine what would happen if more people took took a sta- took to Twitter as a platform and communicated the actions they were taking, and weren't really concerned about whether or not people liked it or not. But it's an awfully big step, but it's right in line with MicroStrategy's, in my opinion, their modus operandi about acquiring more Bitcoin over time, because of all the things that we've all talked about, all of us believers and all of us who understand this and continue to develop an understanding. Well, they're despite all of the horse crap in the media, despite everything that the existing legacy banking infrastructure and the legacy payments infrastructure, who are, I guess, the perceived threat of Bitcoin, all that aside, they're plowing forward and putting their money where their mouth is.
Yeah, and
And
I think I think it sets a really important precedent for other companies. And I think what you're going to see is, as MicroStrategy has proven to be correct in this path, and I don't know that it's belief. I would argue that it's knowing, right? And that's the beautiful thing about Bitcoin. They've you don't throw $150 million at something even, right? Like, they know how Bitcoin works, right? And once you go through that, once you understand how it works, it's a matter of knowing. He knows, a new block will come every 10 minutes. He knows that the current fiat system is failing, and the value of those dollars, at $150 million kept in a corporate treasury in US dollars, will be eroded over time. And he likens it to a ice cube that melts, right? And so he's going to lose, anywhere between 15 and 20% of his purchasing power every year, just keep cash. So yes, there's volatility in Bitcoin. That's okay, because over time that volatility works in your favor, because you know the outcome, right? And that's something that is as frustrating as it can be sometimes, to be a participant in the crypto community along with Bitcoin, and listen to Saylor talk about other cryptos being, not as superior as Bitcoin. In a lot of ways, he's correct, right? And so it's important to kind of put your biases aside and watch how this plays out, because he's taking a substantial portion, if not all, of their treasury and putting it in Bitcoin. And so I think, more or less, from why this is important is because you'll start to see other companies do this when this strategy starts to work, right? And so that's a ton of money sitting around waiting and watching to see how this plays out. And so far, he's been proven right. And I think as we continue to see banks fail, and federal government and the feds, treasury, kind of fumble this interest rate hike and dollar printing, people will go to things they know work. And that's what Michael Saylor is doing with big MicroStrategy.
Yes, and I think you said something really important there with the continued juggling of, or the juggling by the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Secretary and the our federal government leadership that are faced with these the wash rinse repeat cycle of having to, at very specific and very strategically, keep mind you, the debate around the debt ceiling having to be raised, and how again and again and again and again and again and again and again some more, there's a lot of hot air around how the debt ceiling is, it's this is not sustainable. And then we get the other side, like the Yellens of the world, saying, well, if we were to default on our debt, it would be catastrophic. Yes, take all of the meaningless words out of the equation. The bottom line is that in the political apparatus that are leading us here in this country, there 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 will be continued dealings and continued threats around taking things away like Social Security. And I say threats, I just mean hot air. People leveraging people's fear of the future and the uncertainty around their retirement. And anytime one side wants something, they'll throw something into the media around. Well, will this debt ceiling debate is going to go into filibuster or some other like stall tactic until they get what they want, and then ultimately the debt ceiling gets raised. The Federal Reserve then supplies the capital, but where the point I'm driving toward here is, where does it come from? It comes it comes from the Federal Reserve creating those dollars out of thin air. And this is a thread there. This is I'm weaving this into something back what we were talking about a moment ago with Microstrategy's Bitcoin Treasury strategy. Is that if you leave the money that you've earned stored in US dollars in the banking system, those dollars will not buy the same amount of things today as tomorrow as they will today. And uh, this ever present erosion of purchasing power is something that people, once you understand this, then you understand why someone would take, and use Michael Saylor's words, we'd sweep all of our excess cash flows into Bitcoin, or sweep all of our excess earnings into some other asset that is a store of value, like gold or silver, or like metals, like Bitcoin. In some cases, real estate. I used to always wonder when I was a lot younger, why on earth would somebody buy more than one house, or why would they buy anything else and not just keep their dollars? They didn't understand the idea of currency debasement, and they didn't understand the enormous forces that are out of our control that are driving this ship. And the debasement vessel is plowing into the future, and it's taking the monetary purchasing power away from our currency and
Well,
all around
yeah,
the world. This
yeah, and just like what Michael Saylor's doing with his company's treasuries, that's what we as individuals do with our own capital and excess capital, right? We allocate, what we need for bills, we allocate what we need to survive, and then we put the rest in Bitcoin, right? Or other assets that are hard assets, whatever. I do Bitcoin, Ted does Bitcoin. A lot of people, choose to do the same, but you do that because you believe, that those dollars will be worth less tomorrow, like you said today, and Bitcoin, because of its fixed supply, growing demand, will appreciate in value, right? And so that's the neat thing about Bitcoin, is that it's available to everyone. It's not just, a normal person can't go out and buy, 4 commercial real estate buildings with excess cash, right? They just need money, capital, or the knowledge to do it. Anybody with an internet connection, laptop, or a phone can participate in the Bitcoin monetary network. And that's something that's truly unique. And it's not unique to the United States. I think people always forget everything going on in the United States. Bitcoin is, in crypto, is a global phenomenon. This problem doesn't exist in a vacuum in the United States. We have, for many years exported a lot of our inflation, meaning the rest of the world uses dollars too. When we print these dollars here, the value of those dollars becomes worth less everywhere. So that makes it really hard on companies that operate on different national currencies, don't have the reserve status. So I think what you see a lot of people seeing is the same thing we're seeing and saying, why would I store my wealth not only in dollars for my own country's currency, but I have the option to store it in Bitcoin as well. So that's something. So you could look at companies, not just United States companies. There's companies all over the world. There's global companies in Mexico, Europe, China, everywhere, every part of it in India, right? So everyone has access to it. It's something that I think is often overlooked is the global nature of this, but this is a huge deal. Like I don't think it should be understated like what he's doing here. Like this is pioneering a completely new, corporate treasury strategy, right? And you got to give him credit for it. You really do, because he's doing this in the face of constant media FUD, uh, attacks from regulatory agencies. And don't get it twisted. Right now the SEC is coming for what looks like other crypto assets, but they've got their sights on Bitcoin. And so, this is something that we'll see play out over the years, but something that Michael Saylor and Microstrategy is doing is they're leading the way, right? And if this proves to be correct, I think he will be correct. I think it's a giant gamble, and I think he's leading the way to show other companies how to do this. This is something that I think will be very powerful in the history of Bitcoin.
Yes, I agree with everything you just said. But what I would add to that, or perhaps add some, or it has to do the thread that I've woven in my mind here is around the global nature of Bitcoin, and then every other asset in the crypto ecosystem. It's not confined, just like US dollars are not confined to the borders of our country here in the US. US dollars are used around the world by in what 100 plus countries, okay? And that is an interesting thing. And you're talking about exporting our inflation, and really we're exporting one of the things that was exported on the back of those US dollars was the ability for the Federal Reserve to speak and have effect on people globally, because when the Fed talks or the Federal Reserve speaks or they enact monetary policy in the form of interest rate increases or decreases, they there's a ripple effect around the world. And the point I'm getting to is that there that or the thing I'm trying to really like boil down here is that you have other currencies, and other nations have other currencies that they're trying, or they've been trying to, or they've issued, and they're trying to use in their local economies. And because of the challenges of doing that, and the issues that arise politically and internally and externally, whether it's conflict or economic issues, trade problems, there's been a tendency to flee other currencies for the dollar. So the dollar adoption is been strong around the world, and there are plenty of other examples. And Michael Saylor's talks about the Chilean, it's either the Argentine, talks about the Argentinian peso versus the dollar, and the issues that locals in that country have faced, because their local currency, the Argentine peso, has been debased and devalued again and again and again and again and again. And there's been a flight to dollars, and if memory serves, they were actually it was legislated that they weren't permitted to hold US dollars. So imagine that for a second, and imagine what your life would be like if you didn't have a life raft type asset like Bitcoin, or in many cases it was and still is the US dollar, as people start to learn around the world uh, what Bitcoin is. And the thing I'm driving toward here is that the ability for people around the world to participate in this new digital monetary network that is global is, to me, it's an evolutionary step away from, not necessarily away from the U.S. dollar, but the U.S. dollar permeation around the globe started this process in many years back, and but we have the inherent challenges of it's the U.S. dollar is not backed by gold anymore. It can be printed into oblivion. There's a centralized entity that determines the monetary policy, but it's akin to moving the goalposts and changing the rules of the game mid-game, and that's what the Federal Reserve is doing and has done and will continue to do. And there are a lot of reasons for that. It's not just my opinion that I think that's a challenge, but Bitcoin changes the game, and that's ultimately what I'm trying to spit out here, is that this is a new monetary network that has very specific rules that do not change, fixed supply, and when you trade your fiat money that is being debased and you trade that for Bitcoin, you know exactly what you have.
Yeah, no, and I can
And
tell you, I can tell. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
no, no, please,
Yeah,
please,
I
please
lived
go.
in I lived in Argentina, and I can tell you what it's like. They in the 2 months I was there, this is 2018, and the value of the peso dropped 40% relative to the dollar in a 2 month period. And so you might say, okay, well, what does that mean? Well, that means that your purchasing power in pesos dropped by 40% in a 2 month period. All right. And these people aren't earning more pesos. They're not earning 40% pesos. And the interesting thing that I noticed when I was there, and this is a foreshadowing of what's potentially to come. This has been going on in Argentina for many years, but they would institute capital controls on ATMs. Okay, so you could only take out 2,000 pesos time, and on top of that, there's a 10% fee to do so. So really, you're only taking out 1,800 pesos at a time. Credit cards didn't work in most. Okay, and so because of that, what you develop there is a black market for dollars. Okay, and it's called the blue market. I think that while since I've been, but people would store their wealth in dollars, and if you had dollars, it was people started it. The dollars were exchanged preferred over the peso because of the reason, yeah. And so it's these things aren't anecdotal. These things are happening. They're real, and it's important to realize that while the United States today owns the world reserve currency status, that might not be true forever, right? And so they're starting to see things that China and BRICS, other countries that are moving away from the U.S. dollar because of the reasons we talked about. So it's a complex kind of subject, but bottom line, like Bitcoin's the answer. And then the next thing I wanted to move to and talk about was the Bitcoin hash rate. And this is something that is important to understand for anybody that's trying to get into Bitcoin. And a lot of times you hear critics say, well, Bitcoin isn't backed by anything. Furthest thing from the truth because it's backed by energy, right? And this is the idea that uh, takes energy to run the computers, okay, generate the hash power to mine the next block. And that's something that a lot of people miss, where the dollar is technically not backed by anything. Bitcoin is in fact backed by that. If you want to speak to the hash rate, which is over here, growing on the top, right, and it's just been
Yeah.
going
So
straight up.
the thing I think about when I think about the hash rate is the the or I'll talk about this concept or there's a lot of people talk about Bitcoin's monetary policy, which is that a new block is things like a new block is generated every 10 minutes or so. There's an equation floating around there in the Twitterverse and on in other places that demonstrates in mathematical terms very clearly. You don't have to be a mathematician to understand basic math like that. if 1 and 1 equals 2, we trust that. And there's meaning we trust the mathematics, the fundamental underpinnings of the universe, perhaps, is one way to think about mathematics. And the absolute certainty that when you take 1 and you add 1 to it, that you're going to get 2. So thinking in very, very simple terms, we don't have to complicate the living daylights out of this and try to understand all of the deep down inner workings of the math. But the point I'm trying to illustrate here is that the monetary policy that, or the rules that the Bitcoin monetary network follow, are very simple, and they don't change, and they have not changed, and they will not change. Meaning, and I'll make it the other side of that, or one other, or a different perspective, is if you think about the monetary policy of the U.S. dollar, it changes. I mean, every time one of the Fed governors speaks, every time Jay Powell speaks, every time the FOMC decides what their interest rate's going to be based on all these other data sources, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of different data points, trying to I can't even think of a good analogy, but there's individual people in small groups that are making choices and wielding the monetary policy wand, and that creates ripple effects around the world that cause some good things, some not so good things, but it causes there's genuine cause and effect relationship there. And the point I'm trying to get to, back to looking at the hash rate graph here, is that the monetary policy of Bitcoin is that we're going to mine a new block roughly every 10 minutes. There's a statistically significant number of machines, computers that run the Bitcoin, that are running Bitcoin's monetary policy in a form of incorruptible software that are being powered by electrical energy. And the total amount of computing power has grown significantly and continues to grow. And it is and the point I'm driving toward here is that if you're ever, like any one of us who have a Bitcoin address on our phone or our computer, we can, at any point in time, we can go to our own Bitcoin node, or we can go to a node that's available on the internet, and we can look and check our wallet balance address and know with absolute certainty how much Bitcoin we have in our address, or at our address, I should say. And the thing that is important to understand here about the hash rate is it's the strength of the network, and the fact that if this were, and I'll make an analogy here, if you were thinking about the hash rate, or the open ledger, which is secured by the hash rate, I should say. If you looked at an Excel spreadsheet, for example, and we had all of the Bitcoin wallet addresses and all of the amounts in everyone's wallet. And today, what can happen is, if this was a private bank and they had their own ledger, their own Excel spreadsheet, they could change it, or it could be changed. We could mark up their addresses, and this is what the Federal Reserve does when they inject money into the system. They electronically mark up the balances, and this is not me. This is not my explanation. This is taken from Ben Bernanke and other people at the Federal Reserve talking explicitly about how they mark up the balances of accounts at banks that participate in the U.S. dollar, in the financial system in the U.S. So back to the spreadsheet analogy here, is that the spreadsheet of a private corporation or some other third party can be manipulated, and you don't have any control or understanding of how it's being protected or who's messing with it, in a manner of speaking. But what we do know, and with the Bitcoin open ledger, the blockchain, is that the participating computers in this global monetary network all achieve consensus based on a set number of rules, and the incentives are structured as such that when you participate in the Bitcoin mining network, or as a miner or as a node operator, the miners are incentivized to deploy their energy in the form of running a Bitcoin mining node to participate in the mining operations so that it enforces the Bitcoin's monetary policy across the board and will achieve consensus without any human intervention around which transactions are going to be put up for review, in a manner of speaking, in the mempool, and then which transactions are going to be settled on the next block and written into the blockchain. And the point I'm driving toward here, last point, is that the consensus mechanism creates a situation where it would be virtually impossible for us to go back and try and change the Bitcoin blockchain or the ledger or the spreadsheet and the big spreadsheet in the ether here. And the Bitcoin mining network of computers, that energy is devoted towards enforcing the rules and keeping bad actors out and letting legitimate transactions through and achieving consensus, all without any human intervention in that process. The way that humans participate are as they make a conscious choice to run a mining node or run their own node that they can check transactions against. And this idea of consensus without human intervention, and this rock solid monetary policy that one Bitcoin will always be one Bitcoin, and will never. There's a fixed supply, and we can mathematically verify these things. Are the point I was trying to get to around the hash rate.
Yeah, and if you look at what the hash rate is just, you can look at the hash rate and think about it as the total amount of computers that are operating to solve the next block, okay, to solve that algorithm. And look at what I think is interesting about this. You listen to the TV, and if you listen to somebody tell you that Bitcoin, I think you can look at the hash rate and say, well, the market doesn't, because people are expending capital to buy these miners, right, to set them up, to run them, there's electricity, which costs money, right? And if you look at since the beginning of 2023, hash rate is just straight up. What does that mean? That means more people are mining Bitcoin, right? There's more energy expended to get the next block. And counterintuitive to what you hear everywhere else. Now, when you look at this, you've got a lot of people, community going, okay, this is going up really, really fast. What is the reason for that? Speculation that it could be a nation state attack, meaning that nation states are trying to mine Bitcoin. There's other explanations that say, look, there's just new mining software that's come out or hardware that's come out that is more efficient, and this is just a reflection of the market upgrading their mining capability. I think it's interesting to talk about that stuff and be aware of it, but just for the general person, I mean, all you got to do is look at how many people hash rate grows year over year, right, and it's continued to do so. So what does that mean? That means there's more people that are seeing that that are not seeing that believe that Bitcoin has value, right? And they're expending energy to do that, right? And so that's something that I look at when I look at the hash rate. The other thing you can look at here is this is because it's a public blockchain. Hash rates up, they operate in different pools, so people allocate capital to because you don't want to have a lot of people don't want to have a Bitcoin miner operating in their house. So one way to do it is you can allocate money to a mining pool. There's Foundry USA, there's Ant Pool, there's FT2 Pool, but these are the Bitcoin mining pools. Okay, so this is a great site to kind of follow that. It's called Mempool Space. Get on here and kind of play around and look at things. There's go to here. Let's see if it'll let the dashboard play around. But this is a great site to kind of just wanted to touch real quick on this because I think it's important to understand when you're looking at Bitcoin and hearing everybody talk about, oh, well, Bitcoin's imaginary internet money backed by true. So it's a complex topic to really understand flush, but it is important to understand as you.
Yeah, it's something. I would say that your understanding of Bitcoin mining is a progression. It's a journey. It's not something that you just wake up one day, spend 5 minutes reading about Bitcoin mining and how what's actually backing the network. It's something that you develop and understand. At least for me, I mean, and I'm not that special, but the point I'm trying to get to is that it's something that you start to develop an understanding of over time,
Yeah, and
and
there's
the
there's people
pieces
that
start to fit.
there's people that understand this backwards and forwards. Like from my perspective, I have the general idea of what it is, and I probably bumbled through some of that. But like we talk about all the time here, is participate in the network. You don't have to understand the intricacies of how Bitcoin. That's not something that is necessary to get in the game, right? That's just part of understanding why it has value and why people continue to believe in value. Uh, that's something that, like you said, Ted, it's just a progression. It takes time to understand. And last thing I wanted to talk about today is it's an ad from the president of El Salvador to El Salvador, the new land of the free. No fentanyl crisis, no shootings, no lootings, lowest crime rate in Americas. USD and Bitcoin is legal tender. No currency coming. Great coffee, great weather, great beaches. I just thought this was funny because it speaks to the idea of going to start seeing nation states as well as states compete for talent, for people, for workers, and this is the way it should be. And to see a nation state advertise Bitcoin as legal tender as one of its selling points is unbelievably powerful. It really is.
No, I agree, and it's hilarious to read the to to read this, but it is. I think it's just really hard, given the political climate here in the U.S. It's very hard for the federal government to. I think people are just. I think the people in the government who know how to play who know how to play the politics are. It's an incentive. People talk about Bitcoin not being, or that, like, well, the incentives are, they comment on the incentive structure, while the incentive structure in politics is even like 100,000 times worse. And the point I'm trying to get to is that I think I think it's good for nation states and states, people at the state level. We're seeing in Florida, for example, and in Texas, the governors and senators and other state level representation are sticking their necks out, quite frankly, to talk about defending against things like CBDCs, which is a government which we believe would be government overreach, and that El Salvador making Bitcoin legal tender and trying to take advantage of all the things that a global monetary network make possible, like moving to El Salvador, for example, like becoming participating in the local economy with your Bitcoin and your US dollars, for example. And all of the criticism that has been levied against El Salvador for making Bitcoin legal tender, the Bitcoin bonds thing, all of you know, the jokers at the World Economic Forum and all of their like hyper politically motivated things that have nothing to do with making life better for people, but for spitting out and being seen to further their own agenda is just it's laughable. If you're paying attention and you understand the basic principles and the basic dynamics of money, and you understand what's going on. And back to the El Salvador thing, I think it'll be very interesting throughout the rest of this year into next year, and maybe 2 or 3 years out, to see how this nation state adoption thing starts to, or potentially. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think it's very very powerful what's happening at the nation state level here,
Yeah,
and
and
the competition is going to get really. strong, in my opinion.
Well, and if you look at a tweet from Ryan Selkis, he says a number of progressives are ready to swing to the GOP, could help swing the Senate and presidency if the Democratic Party stays on its Senate. Senator Warren or political one. So what he's talking about here is there's a series of tweets over the weekend from people in the crypto industry who have traditionally voted Democrat, who are saying that if these Democrats continue to be on a warpath against crypto, it's going to cost them in the elections because people that are involved in crypto are single party voters. And I will tell you this as somebody who's historically voted conservative, you have a conservative candidate that comes out against Bitcoin and crypto, which I believe are freedom technologies, I will vote for the Democratic nominee if they are pro crypto. Okay, so I don't care if you're a Republican or Democrat. It matters not to me. Both of these people, in my opinion, both of these parties have failed us multiple different ways. When we talk about single issue voters, this is the single issue that I will be voting on in every election moving forward is are you a pro Bitcoin and pro crypto candidate? And if not, I'm not interested. And these guys have to acknowledge this. Past the point of, you can just kind of ignore it. I keep tweeting at Vivek, who's one of the leading GOP candidates. And granted, I'm a nobody, but I want to hear his position on crypto. Like he says a lot of good stuff about other things, but I believe that these guys are going to have to acknowledge in the 2024 election what your stance is, because if the government is going to come out and flat out attack it, right, not do it in a good faith manner, and try to backdoor their way into preventing people from accessing it in the United States, you're going to have to explain that to people. You can't just come out and do it, right? And so I want to hear from both sides. I'm open to whichever side of the party wants to take the most logical path to establishing a regulatory environment in the United States that is conducive to innovation and technology and not prohibitive. Because I believe that this is such a powerful technology that's going to shape the world over the next 5, 10, 15 years that, these American politics, if they want to try to hold it back or prevent it from happening, they're going to set the United States back. And as a citizen of this country, I don't like that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be the single issue voter thing is a very powerful concept in my mind as well, and I think what I want to see personally, I'm just one person as well. I would like to see some political leaders like crap or get off the pot for in a manner of speaking about where they stand, and I think Florida and Texas are good examples of the dominoes, or not dominoes, but the pendulum starting to swing back the other way a little bit. You've seen it was the trend in Washington and or the trend in Washington with Senator Warren and all of this other madness was has been to jump on the flood bandwagon. And I mean, it's not what they want. It's what their handlers want. And I'm a conspiracy nut, but like the where the money flows is where the influence grows. Okay, is maybe one way to say it. So what I'm hoping happens is that people, like the constituents, start to like clench their fists and raise their voice in large enough numbers where it signals that your career as a politician is in jeopardy if you don't take a stand on this particular issue.
Yeah,
And
these. Oh, sorry.
no, go ahead.
Yeah, I think something interesting to point out here is point winning over one mind at a time. The central bank isn't winning over anybody, right? And so you're starting to see this shift to where the momentum is really moving toward Bitcoin because it is freedom tech. It does work. It's fair. The rules don't change, right? You're not seeing a coordinated effort by tens of thousands and millions of independent people getting on Twitter every day and making live streaming videos about the wonders of the Federal Reserve system. Like if you just look at this from a overall 30,000 foot view, where are minds and hearts going? going to Bitcoin. You're not going to current system that is, quite frankly, not worked for the majority of us, right? And truthfully, if you, a lot of it depends on when you were born, right? If you were born, and if you're a boomer, systems worked a lot better for you than it has if you're a millennial, or if you're Gen Z or Gen X, right? And that's just the way that it worked. When they took us off the gold standard and started us off in the system, the dollars were worth more. And over time, because of the way it's designed, the dollar's purchasing power has eroded. And so that's why you see houses now cost $800,000 to $1 million for a simple house, right? And let's just take San Diego, for example. People bought houses, 40, 30, 40 years ago, 50 years ago for, $40,000, $50,000. Those same houses today cost $1 million, right? And it's not like people are making that much more money. And so what that is a reflection of the system. And the system has failed. It's failed, and they always do, right? These fiat systems last anywhere from 70 to 100 years. We're right in the sweet spot. And so when you see people start to wake up to it's kind of a natural progression to the next thing. And the next thing, I think we're lucky that we live in a time where it's Bitcoin. And this is a fair system. Rules don't change. You can study it. You can all of it. It's a public blockchain, right? All the information's available. You can run a node and verify that all of this is happening. So you can't do that with central. There is no transparency, right? And so I think that's important to point out is hearts and minds are being won by Bitcoin and not the.
Well said. The I think the last thing that I would add, or one thing I'll add in trying to bring this to a conclusion, is the following: is that the underpinnings of our society is that we are a free society, mostly, and the what I really am hopeful for is that at one heart and one mind. So I'll quick tangent. And when the U.S. military was deployed in the Middle East or any other place, one of the things that moved the needle or strategically speaking, at the ground level, is that the if you weren't winning hearts and minds, you were going to be fighting not just the military but the citizenry of that nation. And the U.S. has found this out the hard way in various conflicts around the world over the last 50 years or 40 years. Okay, and so hearts and minds, hearts and minds. What I'm trying to say here is that as every day of the week, every day of the year, there's new minds or exposed to this idea of Bitcoin, or this idea of a digital monetary network, and those that get it literally get it, and they acquire some. And it's where I'm trying to go here is this idea that if the citizenry that are the basis of the political apparatus make enough noise, which I think they are starting to, because I think it's starting to, people are starting to feel the pinch, both financially, but also from the core thread here should be freedom. And the if people should feel threatened, their freedom should be, in my opinion, people's freedoms should feel threatened. And that should be enough, in my opinion, also to move the needle, to get them to act and remember where you live in the United States, and that you can participate in the political process. Your votes, whether you believe it or not, actually do matter. And what matters more than anything else is that you have the right to vote, and you're not going to be executed for wanting to go to the poll. Okay. And I think, not to get dramatic, but like and overcomplicate this, but if you care about your freedom, then you should care about learning about this new monetary technology, and learn how to make your voice heard at the state, local level first. And then as we barrel towards the next presidential election, make sure that you understand where the candidates stand so that you can make an informed decision that is important to you. I'm not trying to influence anybody's vote here. I'm just saying you can either participate or not. And I'm the only influence I'm trying to affect here is to get people to participate in the political process so that and have an understanding of how this technology ensures that we have the freedoms that we take for granted, mostly, in my opinion, as well.
Got it.
There, I
Yeah.
said my
So,
piece.
nope, nope. Sounds good. All right. I think that'll wrap it up for today. Throw up this disclaimer right here. As always, not financial advice. We're educational and entertainment. So, that being said, Ted, we'll see you tomorrow.